Welcome to the module on whole interval recording. Whole interval recording is another method of discontinuous data collection. Remember from your review of partial interval recording that discontinuous data collection procedures are referred to collectively as time sampling. In this module, we're going to be talking about whole interval recording. Whole interval recording is a discontinuous measurement method that's used to measure behavior that occurs continuously. Some examples of continuous behaviors might be when your brother screams no for 13 seconds every time your father tells him to take out the trash, or when you stay on task in class all day. With whole interval recording, at the end of each interval, you record if the behavior occurred throughout the entire interval. That video was an example of a behavior that we can use whole interval recording to measure. So in the video you just watched, we can measure if Athena, that dog, was looking away from the camera for entire intervals. And the intervals that you heard, which were denoted by the chime sound, were 5 seconds long. Athena was looking away from the camera for 83% of intervals. Let's look at this example displayed in a different way. These are example intervals. Each interval in this example are 10 seconds long. So when using whole interval recording, you would want to measure whether or not the behavior occurs continuously throughout an entire interval. The green indicates the behavior occurring in the intervals. So let's look at this example. In looking at this interval, where the green denotes the behavior occurring, does the behavior occur throughout the entire interval? Remember, we're going to mark a plus if the behavior occurs throughout the entire interval and a minus if the behavior does not occur throughout the entire interval. So with this interval, would you record as a plus or a minus? Did you say minus? Correct. This interval would be recorded with a minus because the behavior does not occur throughout the entire interval. Let's look at interval 2. Would you record this interval as a plus or a minus? It would be a plus, since the behavior, which again is denoted by the green, occurs throughout the entire interval. So for the entire 10 seconds, the behavior occurred, which means that this interval would be marked a plus. Let's look at interval 3. Would you record this interval as a plus or a minus? Interval 3 would be marked as a minus because you can see that within this interval there is no green, meaning the behavior did not occur at all throughout the interval. Lastly, interval 4. Would you record this interval as a plus or a minus? This would be a minus because while the behavior occurred, it did not occur throughout the entire 10 seconds of the interval. So as a review, whole interval recording is used to measure behavior that occurs continuously. Whole interval recording usually involves brief intervals that are between 5 and 15 seconds, but these may vary and your supervisor will usually set the interval time, so make sure to check with them about how long your intervals should be when using this recording method. At the end of each interval, you record whether or not the behavior occurred throughout the entire interval when using whole interval recording. And then you report the whole interval recording measurement method as the percentage of intervals when behavior occurred. So, as an example of calculating the percentage of intervals, if you measured the behavior for 4 intervals and if the behavior occurred for 4 out of those 4 intervals, then you would mark the occurrence of the behavior as 100% of intervals. Now let's practice. For the following example, we will use whole interval recording to track the student's behavior. Intervals will be 10 seconds long, and behavior will be marked as having occurred if it is observed during the entire 10-second interval. So the target behavior for the next example is going to be off task, which is defined as any occurrence of any of the following: the student looking away from or breaking eye contact with instructional materials, or looking at other items that are not related to the instructional materials, including the cell phone, other students in the classroom, so on. So this is Bobby, your student. You are observing him engaging in off-task behavior, and for the first interval, the first 10 seconds, Bobby is off task for the entire 10 seconds. So you record this interval as a plus. In the second interval, Bobby is still off task for an entire 10 seconds. So you record this interval as a plus as well. For the third interval, Bobby is still off task for the full 10 seconds. So again, you record this interval as a plus. In the fourth interval, once again, Bobby is still off task for the full 10 seconds. So again, you record this interval as a plus. In the fifth interval, Bobby is on task for a portion of the 10 seconds. So you record this interval as a minus because he was not off task for the entire 10-second interval. In the sixth interval, Bobby is on task again during the 10-second interval. So you would record this interval as a minus. During the last interval of observation, the seventh interval, Bobby is once again off task for the full 10 seconds. So you record this interval as a plus. Now we observed Bobby in the classroom for 7 10-second intervals. And remember, we used a plus if he was off task throughout the entire interval and a minus if he was not off task throughout the entire interval. Now out of the 7 intervals, we see that Bobby was off task, looking at his phone, looking around the room, looking anywhere but at his notebook for 5 of the 7 intervals. So after observing the student in the classroom for the 7 10-second intervals, we would then report the percentage of intervals with occurrence of off-task behavior as 5 out of the 7 intervals, divided 5 by 7, which comes out to 0.71, multiplied by 100, and we would record 71% of intervals with off-task behavior. Here is a sample of what a whole interval datasheet may look like out in the field. This will differ from company to company and from supervisor to supervisor. So remember to use whatever data sheet is supplied to you by your supervisor and your company. This concludes our review of discontinuous measurement procedures whole interval recording. Please complete the checkpoint questions on Canvas to proceed to the next module.